matchup several times with Greg once.
Hey everyone, this is Ben from T3 bringing you the Grand Finals game from the Northern California Regional that took place on April 9th at Game Castle. And on the left we have Kris MacLennon playing HB Engineering the Future, and on the right we have Greg playing Whizzard. And special guest commentator, player on the left, Kris MacLennon.
Hey there, how's it going?
Awesome. Thank you very much for joining us. And this is right off of
My
your... you actually suffered a loss to Greg in the last matchup, so you were advantaged, and you get another shot here to take it home.
Yeah, and so I actually tend to have more faith in this HB deck. I've been playing variants of it for probably the last year and a half or so. Some cards come in, some cards come out, but the core of it mostly stays the same. And it's the same HB food coats that's been everywhere. With a couple additions in it that I add for a little bit of flavor.
Awesome. Were you reacting a little bit more to the meta with your flavor calls, or are they just things that you kind of like in the moment?
A little bit. I had taken out team sponsorships, and I had added in a couple other things, just to kind of get away from this Whizzard matchup, because Whizzard likes to trash all your things.
Yep, those campaigns aren't going to last long in this game.
Yeah. So this hand, the starting hand I kept, and there's a good chance that I probably should have tossed it. What I saw was a Biotic Labor, an ABT, a Hedge Fund, an Itchy One, and I believe an Ash. And I was... The fact that it didn't have that good ice should have probably been a sign that I could toss it. But I know that one of the best ways of winning against these Dumble Fork style decks that destroy all your ice is to launch an ABT and get lucky at it and get a bunch of really good ice. And so that's what I started doing.
Yep, immediately.
And it's rewarded me in the past. This is just a blind ABT. I'm just launching it because I tend to think if I don't get ice off of this, I was probably going to be losing the game anyway. So there is a risk. But I usually find it's worth it. And there you saw one of my tech cards that disappeared into the trash forever. Project Junebug, which I put in here specifically to help deal with all of these Faust players that decide to spend their hand getting into a remote. And it's very useful because I can usually get to 4 or 5 points very quickly. So then when I install Advance in a remote, they have no choice but to check it. And 4 net damage can often do a lot of hurt to somebody who is Fausting through everything.
Did that get you kills on the day?
It did not. It actually never saw play on the day.
Oh.
I trashed it on an ABT, or it never appeared from my deck, which I was admittedly a little disappointed in.
But as a 1 or 2 of, you kind of have to...
It's just a 1 of.
Oh, just a 1 of? Yeah, you definitely have to expect it.
So, I figured it would come up at some point, but it didn't, and that was sad. The exact same thing actually happened with my game against Greg earlier as well. I launched an ABT, and it trashed my Junebug. So, it happens.
It does happen. And here you kind of started... I noticed you got flooded. You scored the ABT, but you still have a Vitruvius floating around somewhere.
Yeah. I believe it was in my hand. But the issue is that my money has essentially dried up. I like to have a campaign out by now. As you can see, one of my breaker bays was trashed during that open run on R&D, along with my Caprice, which also was a little painful to see, because a Caprice would have helped a lot in this matchup. Mm-hmm. But I'm torn between my general strategy, and this may not be the best strategy, but my general strategy against these Dumblefork decks is to try to outrush them. if they can get everything set up, if they get their wild side, if they get the Faust, if they get the David, if they get the pancakes, it's really, really hard to score something because that's when they start eating all your ice.
And they have so much momentum, and it carries them so far.
And they can get through almost anything. So my goal typically is to try to play quicker than I normally would, which is actually part of the reason why I put Next Ice in this deck.
Okay.
As opposed to things like Wall of Static and Enigma or something like that. Because Next Ice is very good for rushing, and against anyone who doesn't have Parasite, it's fantastic.
Yeah, they get really big pretty fast.
Yeah, but he finds his David, and he finds his Faust really quickly. And he's able to, again, take out my money for free because he's Whizzard. And he's low on money, but he doesn't need it as much.
Yeah, with Faust and David, he really doesn't have to spend any money at all. Or he definitely doesn't have to spend any money at all to make it through ice.
Yeah. So my general tactic here is the same thing that you probably saw in the earlier games, which is force him to run through a remote several times trying to trash things.
Install Take Two. I believe I just saw you do it. Install Take Two.
And that's usually a very good strategy. It is less optimal against Whizzard just because if there is something to trash down there, he doesn't care. Because he can probably afford to trash it. And my ice is taxing but porous. So he's able to get through, and he's able to just kind of... He suffers a tempo loss, and I'm suffering a card loss. And ultimately, if I'm not making a lot of progress, if I don't have the money to keep defending that ice, this is going to swing in his favor.
So you res the Eli here after he runs the remote to trash the Ash. Why didn't you res that when Greg ran on it before with the Adonis campaign?
Because
you had it in the server, and it looked like you thought about resing the ice, but it seems like that's a pretty big tax for the Faust, too.
Mm-hmm. I think my thought was just he would click through it, which is what he does here. It may not have been the best play in general, but yeah, I probably did not want to go down as far on credits as that.
Gotcha.
Because if I res the Eli and he clicks through it anyway and trashes the Adonis, then I have no money to potentially res the Eli in the future or build up from that if I draw into a hedge fund or something.
Okay.
So I think at this point I didn't want to res. At that point I didn't want to res it just because of my credit situation. With more credits, I felt better about resing it.
Okay.
And so now I believe he's actually used up his David. So this potentially could be a window if I can make it something that's really annoying to get through. So that he would have to spend his entire turn clicking through the Turing. But yeah, so now he's got the core of his rig set up aside from the second David. But he's got the pancakes, the wild side, the Faust, and now it just becomes, can I stick something sufficiently taxing and annoying in that remote?
Yeah.
Or do I have a window here because he doesn't have a Faust? Or another David, I mean. And so that's what I think I go for here. I just say, you know what? 3 ice, and he's out of David counters. Let's see if he can get in. Because at this point, I'm getting somewhat flooded in my hand. I think I have a global food and a corporate sales team in hand as well.
Okay, so you need to start doing something with them. Find a place for the agendas to live.
Yeah, so he, of course, pulls out his second David, which is rather unlucky for me. Even if it had been a clone chip, I think I would have been fine, because that forces him to spend money on a program to get that first David trashed.
Yeah. Have to deal with a little bit of program management. But the Ichi here is a great defense against both Faust and David.
Yeah.
And I don't think he has a lot of clicks here, so are you going to get one or both of these to fire?
I think he does click through it. I think he played David with his first click because the wild side drew him cards.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, it's a ridiculously effective package, and there's a reason that it wins games.
Yeah, anything. If you use the Wildside Pancakes engine, it's just the most efficient thing as far as card economy. 2 cards for 2 credit for 2 cards slots in your deck for 2 cards every turn for free is pretty crazy paired with Faust.
Yeah, and there's ice you can deal with it. And again, I have my kind of secret tech. I think he actually just pumps and breaks it here. But
it looks like
it's a very powerful card. I'm not going to complain about it because that's neither the time nor the place, and we'll assume that the designers of the game knew what they were doing when they made this card, and there are ways of playing around it. But it has to be said that it is one of the cards that made Anarch seriously playable outside of the DLR style decks.
Yeah, and Anarch has always had the really good AIs, but Faust is a little bit more extreme.
Yeah,
and really cheap to import, which is the other scary thing about it.
Yeah, so this res is actually a mistake. I don't think that I need to res the silver here. It costs them a single card to get through, and it brings me down to 2 credits, which makes the chances of me being able to res something else a lot lower. I think about the only thing I could res right now would be a bronze. So I was trying to sneak out an agenda there. I figured I had a window, and the window disappeared.
David there being the key.
Yeah, and David's good, and this is actually an itchy one over HQ. So had I not res the silver, I could have res the itchy here and potentially forced him to either click through or do some more damage. And so now he kind of just says, "Oh, well, you have all the agendas in your hand, don't you?" And he's not wrong about that.
Oh, no. Getting the
I think I still had another global food. Yeah, I had another global food in there. I needed to get something out. But that's what happens. You get flooded, there's no Jacksons, and your ice either melts or is clicked through. So, yeah, I mean, Dumbo Fork in action, right? Greg played it really well, and arguably that opening hand probably could have been better. Like, I didn't see any next ice in my opening hand. That's usually something I look for. But again, I was trying to rush. I was trying to say, let me just fire this ABT and let me get this going and let me get some ice out. If I pull off my Hemdall 1, if I pull off, a couple pieces of next ice, suddenly the game swings a lot more in my favor. It didn't happen, and that's kind of the risk that you run with it sometimes. When I did launch that, everyone around the table was like, yes! Not enough people launch ABTs. Everyone should just launch ABT. My thought is always, like, unless you're well into the game and you have a lot of your ice out already, there's almost no reason not to, because if you didn't hit any ice on that ABT, there's a good chance that they were probably just going to run R&D and steal that agenda anyway, or run your hand and steal it anyway. So you just are accelerating your deck by getting to the cards you want more.
That's all the time that we have today. Thank you very much, Kris, for commenting these last 2 games. And again, congratulations on your 2nd place finish here.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you having me on. It's been a lot of fun.
Awesome, anytime. And thank you very much at home for watching.
Keep playing Netrunner.
All right, bye, everyone.